I think there's something magical about trees with buttress roots or plank roots. You can find these magnificent trees both in the rainforest and in other environments. Sometimes these roots don't even look like something natural at the first glance, but they do serve an important purpose by keeping the tree from falling over, even in very thin soil layers. And they also keep the soil in place to prevent mudslides to some extent. Once it was time to rescape my biggest vivarium, I wanted to step up my game when it comes to making DIY backgrounds, and I had previously seen a very unique and effective method of creating a fake buttress root tree using blankets dipped in cement. I decided to try it myself, and I have to say that it was much easier than I expected. This is the second episode of my 4-part series Vivarium Rebirth, where I'm dismantling and rebuilding my biggest vivarium to take it to the next level. If you want to watch all the episodes, I will put them in a playlist that will be linked in the description. The idea behind this method is that the natural curves and waves in these trees somewhat resemble draped fabric. I'm notoriously bad at shaping styrofoam and messing around with silicone, so I thought this would be an easier method for me to create something that would look natural. I have to give a massive shout out to my fellow Swedish Darkthrone keeper Kalle, the original creator of this method, and I will leave a link to a Dendroboard thread about his build in the description down below. The first step is to create a temporary workspace to create the tree itself in. I used 4 pieces of styrofoam that I connected with toothpicks to create a somewhat stable construction. This won't be anything permanent though, as the tree will eventually stand on its own, but I needed to simulate a corner to work in. This has to be taller than the final tree is going to be, since the top of the tree will look rather ugly and will have to be removed. This is 120 cm tall, and the vivarium that it's going in is only 90 cm tall. Next, I prepared a polar fleece blanket out of polyester, which will make up the stem of the tree. I used Thorgun from IKEA if anyone is curious. There are probably other options, but fleece fabric is quite strong and definitely did the job. I cut it to a good size, folded it nicely and poked a wooden skewer through it to maintain the draped shape with 4 waves in it, which I eventually increased to 5. Then I experimented a bit with hanging the blanket in a way to make it look nice. Once I had a structure I was happy with, it was time to suit up with protective gear and create a mixture of Portland cement and water. It's important that it's only cement and not concrete, as you don't want any ballast in it. You could say that the fleece blanket itself serves as the ballast in this construction. I started with water and added a little bit of cement, mixed it up well, added a mid-pour and continued like that until I was happy with the consistency, so I have no idea what exact proportions I used. I mixed the cement slurry for about 10 minutes, so the cement would really properly mix into the water, and you want the mixture to be somewhat thick once you're done. However, you don't want it to be too thick either, since the blanket will suck up a lot of liquid, thus making the mixture drier and thicker as you cover it up. If you didn't use gloves before, make sure to do so now that it's time to cover the blanket, because it's about to get messy. Make sure the whole thing is completely covered. I actually had to add a bit more water to the mixture, because it was initially so thick that it was difficult to cover the whole thing. However, my original plan, which was to attach the wooden skewers to the top with some kind of wire, didn't work since they instantly broke after getting wet from the water cement mixture. To salvage the situation, I got a much better idea, which was to use these bigger wooden sticks and place them diagonally at the top of the styrofoam corner. I had to use a knife to poke some bigger holes through the blanket, but aside from that it was basically the same thing as before. I missed recording when I hung it up, since I was kind of stressed, but here is the result. I think it was a good call to have the blanket longer than the height of the workspace, since the extra friction at the bottom made it easier to adjust and fine-tune the shape of the tree. Since I want the tree to fit into the corner of the vivarium, I also tried to make sure that the edges of the blanket mostly touched the side panels of the styrofoam. I left this to cure for about 24 hours. The next day I removed 2 of the styrofoam pieces for easier access, and the construction held up very well on its own by now. The styrofoam pieces will be reused in a different part of this project later, which we'll see next week. Now it was time to start working on the buttress roots themselves. The base of these will be some corrugated pipes, supported by wooden skewers, toothpicks and tape. As you can see, Working on a sheet of styrofoam comes in very handy, as it allows you to just stick the toothpicks and skewers right into it. I also placed some toothpicks inside the base of the pipes like this, which greatly helped keeping the pipes in place. This is a part of the build that you definitely don't want to rush, so take your time until you get happy with the result. Once I was satisfied with the layout, I started cutting up pieces of fabric to fit each root. Then it was time to mix up some more cement and repeat the process you saw before. Once they were all in place, I looked for any uneven surfaces around the edges of the new blankets and added some more cement slurry to those places to even it out. Next, I created some vines by simply taking some yarn threads, dipping them in cement and laying them down on the tree. Now I let it cure until the next day. Then I removed the back styrofoam piece and started cutting the bottom part to size. It was impossible to remove the styrofoam entirely, but it will serve as a good base for the tree to stand on. I have to admit that more plastic than I would have liked ended up on the ground rather than in the big plastic box that I intended for all the dust to go into, but I was able to remove it with a vacuum cleaner afterwards. I treated the surface of the freshly cut styrofoam with a heat gun so the edges wouldn't fall apart as easily, but this is not necessary. I also cut off the top of the tree, which is why I was fine with the upper portion looking as ugly as it did. I recommend using an extra pair of hands here to keep the whole tree from shaking uncontrollably when you do this. Next, I mixed up a little bit more cement slurry to cover the yarn threads one more time, since the cement layer on top of them wasn't very thick and it had fallen off in some places where I accidentally scratched it with the handle of my saw earlier. To make the surface a lot more interesting, I made a mixture of cement, peat and water and painted it all over the tree. This got rid of any obvious smoother spots. This is in fact the last time you will see cement being used in this video, but don't worry, it will be back next week. After letting it cure, I rinsed it off with water to remove any debris. Then I let it dry up completely before moving on. The only thing remaining now is to paint and conceal the whole thing. I decided to try a product called Color Fix from the Danish company MakeMake. This seals the concrete and makes it water repellent, but you can also mix various color pigments into it, so it serves as the paint and the varnish at the same time. While experimenting with getting the right colors, I painted the back of the tree, since all of the colors had a weird red-blue tint to them until they had partially cured, making it difficult to see what I was doing when I was mixing it up in the cup. I experimented a bit with different colors and I ended up doing a thick base layer of dark brown. I went back and forth a lot while painting and covered each area multiple times, so you could basically say that I applied the equivalent of 2 layers. It cures fairly quickly, so when I was done painting one side, the other side was dry enough to add the highlights. For that, I used a mixture of yellow and light brown. I put down a small dot of it with one tiny paintbrush, and I took a larger dry brush to spread it out into a thin layer, mostly based around the edges of the roots. Finally, I covered all of the vines in this yellowish color as well. I'm not super happy with the very shiny surface of the dried Color Fix, so I might consider using acrylic paint or Drylok if I make something similar in the future, but I still think it turned out well. As I said, the Color Fix I used serves as both a paint and a varnish at once. You probably don't actually need to varnish it, however, freshly cured cement has a high pH value, so if you don't seal it in any way, you should probably try to neutralize it in some other way, such as spraying it down many times, leaving it outside in the rain for a while, or treating the surface with acid before putting it in your vivarium. Now the tree is finally done. This was quite a journey, and before I started, I thought there would be a significant risk that I would be unhappy with the result and end up not using it. However, it went much better than expected, and I'm so happy that I decided to try it. I learned a lot from it, and hopefully you did too. Once again, a massive shout out to Kalle for pioneering this method. A link to his original Dendroboard thread will be in the description down below if you want to check out his amazing build. In the next episode of Vivarium Rebirth, I'm going to create a fake rock background using another rare method in the hobby, Hypertufa. We're getting closer and closer to finally putting it all together in the vivarium, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that, because you're in for a wild ride. As always, thank you for watching. If you want to see more of my animal room, check out my Instagram page at gecko_geek06, where I sometimes post sneak peeks of my new projects before I show them on the channel.